Hello, lovely sewing people. I'm Hazel, and today we are going to make the Zippy Circle Pouch. So this is the Zippy Circle Pouch. You can see it's got a round top, and I've used a bit of stiffener inside to give a really nice firm finish for that. And the side has a zip all the way around. It's about 3 inches deep, and when you open it up inside, it's a really neat finish because we are using a grown-on binding, so no separate binding pieces to fit, it's all in one. And the pattern is full of lots of tips and techniques for how to get a really good finish. I've also put a couple of segments in this video for people who are complete beginners. So if you're feeling intimidated because it's got a zip, don't worry, I've got your back. Let's get started. So this little section is for those of you who are complete beginners and would love to understand the rules of sewing. So these are things you'll see me doing throughout the entire video, and so just a quick explanation here so you have some ideas of the things that I'm not going to tell you as I'm sewing. So first thing you need is some extra supplies alongside what it says in the pattern. So pins are very handy. I've got 2 lengths here. Mine are all glass headed because you can easily melt the plastic ones with an iron. Obviously, I'm telling you that from experience. The other thing I use a lot of are these clips. These are quilting clips. Sometimes I do a mixture of both because if you really have a tight grip, you can easily pull these clips out, whereas the pins you can't. But then on the other hand, the pins are hard to use while you're sewing at the machine. So it's some and some. You will also need thread. I never ever skimp on my thread, so I've got a selection of Scanfil or Gutermann, but there's Metler and Orifil and others as well. And obviously scissors, so big scissors for cutting, but also little tiny scissors for snipping your threads as you go along. Obviously a seam ripper is unfortunately a very useful thing to have. So let's pop this to one side for a minute. The next thing, in this particular pattern, I use this amazing glue for basting. Basically, it dries clear. You can use it anywhere you would normally want to do basting stitches, and it does actually wash out. If you can't get hold of that glue, just use an ordinary glue stick. Now, the main problem with this is purely the size of it. So if you need a tiny little bit at the top of your seam, this is a really fat top to it, but you could use this instead. The next thing that we're going to use a lot in this particular pattern is this. This is an awl. I bought it in a leather repairing kit. I think I had one when I was doing some jewellery as well, but it's really useful for just putting pressure down on the fabric and guiding things. So you'll see me use that quite a bit. If you haven't got one of these, you can always use the edge of your scissors. You could use your seam ripper, you can use a chopstick, anything really that has got a pointy end that you can get a little bit of distance away from the sewing and put some pressure down. Next is machine feet. Now, my machine actually came with this foot here. I don't use it very often because I discovered this one, which is an open-toed foot. I'm not even sure what it's called, maybe an embroidery foot, something like that. But I like the fact that this little section here is almost, gives me a perfect 1/8 of an inch top stitch when I'm sewing, and that's the other side. You'll also need a zipper foot. See, the idea is then the zipper will travel to the side of the foot so you don't have any problems with the foot being pushed to one side. This particular one, again, it came with the machine, has a little ridge underneath for the teeth of the zip to go through. Great foot. The next thing you need to know is stitch length. Generally, when I turn on my machine, it comes out at about 2.4, and that tends to be quite good for most ordinary sewing. Sometimes if it's thicker fabric or lots of layers, you could turn it up to 2.6 or 2.8. For top stitching, depending on how visible you want your stitches to be, I would turn your machine up to 3 or 3.5. And last but not least is seam allowance. So the seam allowance that I use for all of my patterns generally is 1/4 of an inch. It particularly makes it easier when you're joining circles and shaped items. There's not much to cut off afterwards if you do need to cut anything off. But occasionally I use 3/8 of an inch. Now, to get a perfect 3/8 of an inch, you would run the edge of the fabric against the edge of your foot. Other than that, you can use a 1/4 inch foot on your machine. And I think that's it. I think we're about to get started. The very first thing you need to do before you do anything else is cut out your pattern pieces. Now, a lot of these longer pieces are in 2 sections because of the size of the paper, and so you need to glue them together first. Now, I like to leave a little tab on one side and then match up the marks and glue them. And then the next thing you need to do is you need to cut out a little section where each notch is. There are no dots in this, so it's just the notches you need to worry about. I like to use this, which is a pattern notcher, which is very cheap and easy to get hold of, or you can just do it with scissors. You can also see I have colour coded my pieces so that I know which fabrics I am going to cut out, and of course you can use the chart that you get with the pattern pieces. Now, I promise that this tutorial is going to be for complete beginners. So if you are very familiar with sewing, you don't need to watch this bit. I suggest you skip to the next section. So I'm going to show you how to interface. So I'm using a woven interfacing. You can just see the grain there. But actually you can use an ordinary medium weight non-woven one. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I have cut out this little piece here, the back loop, because you don't need to interface that. Let's pop that to one side. And then I'm going to follow the official instructions for how you fuse this. I often don't. I often just do it with steam, but I'm going to do it the proper way because this is the instructions from Vliseline on how you actually interface. So I can see straight away I'm going to have interfacing coming off the end here, so I don't want to stick it to my felt ironing board. So I'm just going to chop that out. I've told you to interface the whole piece only because it makes it so much easier, particularly with shapes like circles, to get a really nice finish. There we go. What I've done now, I've got one of my nice tea towels and I've made it wet. This is probably going to hiss quite a lot, so I apologise for the noise. So lay your wet tea towel or wet pressing cloth over what you're doing. I've got the iron to the correct temperature, which is a wool setting. And then what you're going to do, you're not ironing, so moving it around, everything. You're just literally pressing it, letting it rest for a little bit, and then moving on to the next bit. So let's just see if that is fusing. You can always go back as many times as you need to get it to fuse. And there we go, that is pressed. Now, the trick to interfacing is leave it until it's cooled down a bit, because the glue itself will remelt and you can reposition it if you need to. So I'm just going to leave that for a second or two, and then I'll get my pattern pieces and show you how to lay your pieces out. So here's the pattern layout. So there's actually quite a lot of space on here for you to position your pieces as tight or as far apart as you want to. I've noticed as well that this particular fabric is gorgeous and has got a really nice big design that I want to have in the centre of the top. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay this out from the front. And then make sure I fold this in half. You can fold it into quarters as well if you need to, but I can see if I pop that one there, that one there, pop that in half and flip it over, and you've got the perfect positioning. There we go. So I'm going to go take that away. I'm actually going to cut that on my cutting mat, and then we will move on to the next stage. So I've got a pile of pieces now, cut out all my lining pieces and my main fabric pieces. Notice I've kept all of the pieces together because we've got more to do. And of course I need to interface the lining zipper tab. So I've got that little piece of interfacing left over from before. It's only a small piece. I'm not going to bother with the pressing cloth or anything. And then I'm going to take that and cut it out on the cutting table. And we're still cutting out, although this is quite quick compared to some patterns. And I now want to cut out my top and base stiffener and fleece. I've actually cut out the fleece, but this needs to be as accurate as you can possibly get it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to weight it down, and then I'm going to trace around it with a fine liner, and then cut it out with scissors. So basically, you know you don't want to see any of the pen. So cut just inside the line. This piece can end up happily quite a little bit smaller, but it definitely doesn't want to be bigger. There we go. So repeat for the second circle. Okay, so we're ready to fuse the fleece onto the various pieces we need. So first of all, we've got the outer lower side, and we're going to place the fleece on and leave an even margin all round. So it should be about 1/4 of an inch. I'm also going to prepare the same for the upper outer side. You sometimes find these pieces sort of grow when you cut them, so I can see that that one has done exactly that. So I'm going to cut a little piece off so it's not too long. So I'm using my pressing cloth again. This can shrink if you press it too hot, so be a bit careful. Okay. It can also be a little bit reluctant to fuse, but actually this hasn't done too badly. So what I'm going to do now is actually turn it over and do it from the other side. And then what you can do with this to check that it's fused is just touch the edges, and if you can see that the glue, the dots are sticking to the fabric, then you are fine and you have fused. So move those pieces. Now we have got our stiffener pieces. Now each of these needs a circle of the fleece. And then last but not least, we've got our outer top, which also needs a circle of fleece. Again, centralised with a nice margin all the way around the edges. Right, so that has fully fused. These two, yep, they have fully fused as well. Phew, because obviously what you can't do is put a iron straight down onto that surface because it is a man-made fabric. Right, last but not least, we are going to mark up our pattern pieces. I'm using an air erasable fabric marker. You can use a heat erasable one, but obviously you might have to replace it if you've ironed it. Now I've made sure that this is the top, made sure that that is facing the right way. I'm just going to mark the exterior of the fabric for the circles. Now I'm just going to show you, these circles are all very slightly different sizes, which is intentional. So to make sure we always know which one is which, I'm going to put T on the top piece. Again, check it's the right way up. It doesn't matter as much with the piece that's going to be at the bottom underneath. And I'm just going to do a small B in the seam allowance. I'm going to do the same with the lining pieces, and then the other pieces, all of the other pieces are going to be marked on the reverse, which is how you would normally do it. There we go. We are now ready to begin sewing. We're going to get started with our zip. Now I'm using zipping by the meter, which is my preferred choice, but a lot of you might not be able to get that. So what I'm showing you now, this is a very cheap zip that I bought ages ago. In fact, I bought a bundle of different colours, and I thought I'd show you how you can actually use a pretty zip pull, again also fairly easy to purchase, and then just cut the zip to size. So what I'm going to do, I'm using my awl, my pointy tool, and I'm just going to get it inside these teeth at the bottom here, just on the one side. Careful when you're using it so you don't poke yourself. And there we go. That's just removed that. Now you can see with this zip, you've got no plastic or anything at the bottom. You can just slide your zip pull onto this section and it will come out perfectly aligned. So what I'm going to do, pull it up. If I was going to use this zip now, what I'd do is I'd chop that end off, chop it to size, and then leave the zip pull in the middle because that will make it a lot easier when you go to sew. Right, pop that to one side. So we are starting with our zipper tabs, which should be the same width as your zipper. So if you were using a wider zipper, a number 5, just make the tabs a bit wider. So we want the teeth facing up. This is going to face down and attach to the top. The other one, the lining, is going to face up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip it further down on both sides just to hold this in place. Now, I'm not going to show you myself sewing this because it's fairly straightforward, but we're going to stitch this at 3/8 of an inch rather than 1/4 of an inch. And you can use your hump jumper to actually lift up the foot to help you get over the teeth of the zip. There we go. Take off those clips, and what we're going to do is finger press, which basically means crease it with your fingernail is the easiest way to do it, so it's facing upwards. And then we're going to fold our zip up and attach just the outer zipper tab to the other end. So again, I'm going to put a couple of clips in to hold it so it doesn't shift. You could use a little bit of glue if you wanted to, but obviously within the seam allowance. And I'm going to go and stitch that side. And there you go. You can see I've done exactly the same again. And now I'm going to finger press that away like I did before. Flip the zip so it's facing outwards, because now we need to pull the lining tab up. Again, we'll finger press that away. And this is where your glue will come in very handy. If you don't have the sewing glue, you can just use an ordinary household glue stick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that up. And I want it so it's just covering the stitching line. There you go. Crease it with my fingers. Now this time I am going to put a dab of glue inside. There we go. Then I'm going to take it over to the machine, and I'm going to turn my stitch length up to, I'm actually turning mine up to 3.5, but you could turn it up to 3, and I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch in from each side, and that's going to secure that lining tab underneath. So there we go. You can see we've stitched each side there, and the stitching is covered on the inside. Last but not least, on the zipping, we now need to mark some quarter points. So I'm going to fold that in half so the edges match. And then pull the tape so I know that it's straight and there aren't any wrinkles, and I'm just going to mark the edge at the top. Going to do the same again, mark the edge at the bottom, and then we're going to put these together, these two marks, and mark the quarters. There we go. Now we're ready to do our back loop. So we're going to need our iron in a second to press this. This is really straightforward. So press it in half. Unfold it and press the edges to just short of the middle. And then do the same on the other side. And then last but not least, oh, I have bashed the stand for the camera. Last but not least, and we're ready to go over to the machine. So I'm going to take you over to the machine and show you how to edge stitch. Okay, let's move my hump jumper to one side because I'm not going to need this, but we are going to use the pointy tool. I did say I was going to show you the many uses of a pointy tool, so this is one of them. So the first thing I'm going to do, I lift up my foot, and whichever foot you're using, get used to where the little marks are. So I've got this notch here and this little triangle. So I know if I put that edge just where the edge of the fabric, just where that little edge there is, I'm going to get the needle in about the right place. I've got my stitching length turned up to 3.5 again because I want really visible big stitches, and I'm just going to start it off. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use the pointy tool to keep things nice and straight, and there we go. You see, the pointy tool just helps everything to run in the correct direction without moving off. I'm actually going to stitch across the end. Just be a little careful that that back edge doesn't lift, which it didn't. And then I'm going to go up the other side. If you were doing something longer, like a strap, you'd need to do it all in the same direction, but this is just a little tiny thing, so it doesn't matter. And gone too far, so I'm going to finish that off. There we go. And then what we're going to do, while we're still at machine, we want about 1/4 inch over the edge here. That's because if this stitching goes in use in a year's time or a couple of years' time, you want to have enough in there to poke it back in properly and stitch it shut. So this is smack bang in the middle. You can hold it with a clip if you want to, but I'm not. And then what we're going to do, we're actually just going to stitch across the top. Now you could change to your zipper foot because this zipper teeth is going to be there in the way, so your foot is probably going to only want to run up to the edge of it, but that should be enough. So what I like to do when I'm stitching things into position, I like to go to the center because otherwise the foot might drag it into the wrong direction. I'm going to switch my stitch length back down to 2.4 and I'm going to go forwards. And then backwards. I'm just trying not to get my hands in the way. There we go. And then back into the middle and cut. And then to do the other side, just do exactly the same again. So lift this back. So you're forming a loop. You've got the 1/4 inch showing. And then start in the middle again. And that's it. So we'll go back over to the cutting table and have a quick look at that, and then we're on to the next stage. And there we go. So you're just going to need to remember to keep moving this out of the way of the seams as you're working on it. I'm also just going to nip off these little threads, because if they get caught in our seam, they're going to be annoying. Okay, we can pop this to one side for a minute. So we are now going to be working on the outer upper side. So first thing we need to do, and this is really important for later, is we need to do a line of stitching across the top, and it needs to be just short of 1/4 inch. Our seam's a 1/4 inch. This needs to be literally a needle width away from that. So I'm going to go and do that on the machine, and I'll show you. There we go. So that's our line of straight stitching. This is easiest to do when everything is flat, which is why we've done it now. And you can see there is 1/4 inch, and we are just 1 needle's width to the side of that. Okay, next piece is very straightforward. Fold it up so that the short edges are matching, and then we are going to stitch at 3/4. We're going to stitch at 1/4 inch, and then we're going to press the seam open. So I'll go and do that. There we go. So I have switched my iron off now, so I'm going to open it out and finger press it, and then we're going to work on the lining. So we don't need to do any stitching on the lining, so we just need to fold it in half, stitch it at 1/4 inch and press it open. There we go. Going to do the same again. Finger press it open. Can use a seam roller if you want to. And then we're going to turn the lining the right way out. So we now have our zip, we have our outer, and we've got our lining. And the first thing we're going to do is match all of the 1/4 marks. So at the moment we're not going to use any glue, but glue is definitely what we're going to do. So we know we need to put this upside down so the bottom edge is at the top edge of your zip. So let's do that first of all. And then we're going to put the lining to the inside. So back centre mark matches up with the seam. Again, your 1/4 marks will match. In a minute, we're going to use a bit of glue stick to make this all work. So I've got a bit of scrap paper here, because this is the easiest thing to do. And I would start with the outer and just run your glue stick along the top edge, so about 1/8 of an inch down. Check that your marks still line up. And then you will need to press it into place, because otherwise it won't want to join. Pop a couple of clips in to hold it. And this is actually a washable glue basting stick, but as I said earlier, you can actually use just your ordinary school glue. And when you've done the outside edge, you can go along and do the lining. So what I'm going to do is go around in a circle again, because that'll give this a chance to set. I'm going to start from this end. I think in the instructions I did actually say to do one side and then do the other side, but I was trying to save a bit of time, but I don't think it has. So the important thing, of course, is making sure the marks all line up. There we go. So obviously the alternative to using this glue is to either use a lot of clips or to baste it by hand. So we're back over at the machine, and the first thing I'm going to do is change out for my zipper foot. So I'm not sure which one you will be using. There is the type that sort of attaches from the side and is adjustable, but this is the one that came with the machine, which I find perfectly adequate. So that's in position, and I'm going to be following the line on my machine, which is at 1/4 inch here. I'm going to start just in front of where the zipper pull is, because then there's less for me to move. Now you can see, because everything is glue basted together, it's really straightforward to get this in the correct position. So there we go, stitching from the outer, because that's the side that matters the most, and there we go. If you use either glue basting or you can use double-sided tape, it does make putting in zips much easier. Now, if you find that you need to use your hump jumper, you can still do that with a zipper foot. Just be very careful how you do that. Back down. So I'm actually going to, that's it, still raise it up so that it's to one side of the needle, because you don't want to stitch through your hump jumper. You can, but it's not a good idea. And finally, when you get to the zipper pull, you just need to lift up your foot and then pull it to the other side of the needle. You can see there, that looks pretty even. That's slightly annoying. I'll deal with that by just pulling that out of the stitching line there. And then what I'm going to do is just pull just the outer up. And I'm going to finger press it. So switch out your foot. Turn your stitch length back up. And I'm going to start at the back where the seam is, because that's the easiest place to hide anything. And we're going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch down. So for this foot, if you run the edge of the foot along the edge of the fabric, you'll get a nice 1/8 top stitch. I'm also going to lock my focus, which I forgot to do before. Hump jumper needed. Now you can see I have not pulled the lining down because we are going to do clever things with the lining later, so we just need the outer and the zip to be top stitched. So again, move the zipper pull. Here we go. And there we go. So you can see you've got the double line of stitching there where we've just top stitched through the seam allowance and through the outer. And I'm just going to pull the lining down temporarily to get it out of the way so we can do the other side. Let's put it through so you can see. There we go. So what we're going to do next is pull that loop down out of the way. We're going to prepare our outer piece. So this time we know we want the line of stitching to be at the bottom. You can see I've prepared this earlier. So the line of stitching is at the bottom because that's where it's going to join to the circle, and I've stitched it and there we go, finger pressed it. So we know we want the top of this to match the bottom of the zip. So there we go. I'm going to clip and glue this as before. This time I'm going to do one side, then I'm going to add the lining, and there we go. I'm going to go and stitch this, and then let's flip it back inside out so we can stitch it from the right side and top stitch it, and then I'll bring it back. And here we go. You can see from the inside the two lines of stitching. What I did to make it easier to top stitch was I actually did open the zip out. And you can see there, that's it. I'm actually going to leave the zip open. I'm going to try and pop the linings so that they're slightly out of the way for the next step, which is the circles. Oops. There we go. So we are nearly there. We just need to put our circles, attach them to the rest of the pouch, and then bind, and we're done. So first of all, you remember earlier we made these have these stiffener with the fleece on. Now, one thing I want to do, I'm just going to trim this up so that they are identical in shape, because we spent quite a lot of time making sure this this stiffener is a good shape. So I'm going to do the first one. There we go. So we're going to start. Now remember earlier we marked our circle so we can tell which one's which. So that's the bottom, and that's the bottom, that's the top, and that's the top. So let's pop the bottom one to one side because we'll start with the top one. So turn over the top, and it needs to go right side down. So you can see the top has got an extra piece of fleece. That's to give it a sort of nice rounded finish. So what I'm going to do first of all is fleece side down. Going to pop that over the fleece we've already added. And this is entirely done with glue. If you didn't do this with glue, again, a lot of clipping, perhaps even hand basting. So I've got my mark there. I can see the mark. The marks are on the outside in this one because we need to be able to see them when we're sewing. But I'm just going to start off by adding some glue. This glue is great because it dries clear and not sticky. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm actually going to match up the two marks opposite. These circles are all slightly different sizes. The reason being you've got different amounts of padding. So this one, okay, that mark matches there. The lining circle is smaller than the outer circle, which is why glue is so handy for putting them together. So when it's done, the fabric is pulled down over the fleece there. Let's do the other side. Again, with this glue, you do need to press it together for it to actually stick. Anybody who's done English paper piecing will probably have come across this before. There we go. So match all the edges together. And that is our first circle. So you can see this one, we've got the nice design in the centre. Let's do the second one. So the second one hasn't got any fleece on it. This is the base. So pop that face down. And this time we're going to put the Peltex, the hard side of it, downwards because this is going to form the base and we want this to be nice and stable. So I'm actually going to just attach it with a bit of glue to make my life a bit easier. Get it central. And you can see in this case, the underneath circle is smaller than the lining circle. So let's do the same again. I'm going to put this around half of it so that I can match the markings before I start putting it together. So it's one, that's the bottom mark. That's the side mark. And again, you can see this time the lining circle is slightly bigger than the outer. But when you press it together, it will nicely wrap itself over the stiffener. Go. Okay, so they are ready. The next thing we're going to do is take our gusset, side, whatever you want to call it, and we are now going to get that lining out of the way. We'll start with the top. We do them one at a time. We need to put some snips in here, not too close together, because the more you snip into this, the more this is going to stretch out. So we want these about 1 inch apart, just enough to give us a little bit of leeway when we're adding our circle to our gusset, but not so much that it becomes too large and stretches. There we go. Obviously I didn't measure that, I just did it by eye, but you are welcome to use a ruler if you want to. So now we need to just figure out which way round we want this to be. So this is going to be the top. So turn it out. So we know we want that to be at the back on the exterior. So just going to hold it in place just so we know we've got it the correct way round. Then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start adding clips. So as we did earlier, we're going to match the mark. So the back seam to the mark at the top. There it is. Lost it for a minute. So obviously my glue hasn't held here, so I'm going to add a little bit more glue just to keep it all nice and neatly together. And we want the edges to match, but we're actually stitching it just inside the line. So you remember we did that lovely line of stitching earlier. So I'm going to put clips in to hold it all together. And then we'll go over to the sewing machine. Okay, ready to go. Okay, so we are ready to stitch our circle. I've locked my focus, so hopefully it means you get a nice clear view all the way through. And the first thing I'm going to do is take out one of the clips because I need to be able to get my foot to the thing. So there's going to be a lot of squishing of this side and pulling of this side to try and make sure we get a nice curved line. And instead of worrying about the markings on the machine or on the foot, we are going to use the line we've stitched over knowing we need to stitch just to one side of it. That's it. But what we're going to do is try and pull the edge out using our pokey tool to get it nice and smooth. So I'm just going to start with back stitching. Not much, because I don't want to create any flat sections, because this is really going to show. This is the top of the pouch, so we want this to be nice and circular. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is stitch a little way, take clips out, lift up the foot. Remember, I've got a knee lift, which is why you're not seeing me do this. And I'm going to move the gusset, the side, around. And the other thing you can do with your pokey tool is just push everything sort of slightly down and towards the foot. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just check quickly that that looks pretty circular. If there's any points that you can see you've had a big jump or it doesn't look like a nice shape, you can always go around and just stitch that little bit again. This looks okay. So what we'll do is I'm going to go back over to the table and then we'll have a quick look at it turned inside out and see if we like it. And if that's fine, we'll do the base. And there we go. So just so you can see, that is the circle. And let's turn it inside out. Obviously we'll turn it back through because we don't need it inside out, but this is the very best way to check. And that looks pretty good. The octopus is in the correct position. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the base circle. And there's the bottom done. I'm pretty happy with that. It looks pretty even. And when we turn it through, just to check, run your fingers through the edges and just make sure there's no pointy sections. Oh, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's turn it back. And then we're ready to do the lining. So this is a one-step lining and binding. So I always call it self-binding. You could call it a grown-on lining. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to start on the top again. So we're going to pull the lining up, and then we want to make sure that it's nice and tight away from the zip. So we are going to finger press. If you see any little whiskers, snip them off before you forget. go. So what we're going to do now, you can see this is about 3/4 of an inch above the edge of the lining. Now you need to make sure this isn't too tight, so run your fingers around it first on the inside and make sure that it's sitting completely flat, not too tight. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn over the edge of the side until it touches pretty much the top of the raw edge there. So it's about 3/8 of an inch, and then go round and again finger press. You could turn on your iron if you wanted to, but I'm trying to keep this really speedy for you. So finger pressing is the and keep it fairly even. It can be adjusted when we go to the next bit anyway to fold it over. So I'm going to start not at the seam end because this is easier here, and I'm going to keep my finger inside. I'm going to fold this over so it just covers the stitching, and it will just sink in nicely into the dip where the stiffener is. So I'm going to pop a clip in. I'm going to do sort of the 4 points of the compass, as it were, before I go around and do the rest. Okay, and you can see because this is unlined and we know that this is the right size to fit that stitching line, it should miraculously shrink down into place and you won't end up with any little folds or pleats. Okay, again I'm going to go around one more time, just pull it with my fingers to make sure it is not too tight because it will pucker the outside, and we're going to go back over to the sewing machine. So here we are again, pointy tool in hand again because it is really helpful for this, and we are going to start stitching. Now you can do this by hand or machine. I'm going to do this by machine because it is quick and easy. So start off by taking a couple of clips out, and then we're going to try and edge stitch like we've done previously. So I'm going to set it up so on my foot there's a little triangle here so that the edge of the triangle is to the edge of the binding. And I'm going to start off with a lock stitch. I've just realised I've put my camera in a bit close, so if I bang the camera I do apologise. So as you go round, just keep checking that you're not accidentally stitching through the upper side. If you feel a little ripple forming, that's when you just push your pointy tool down and it will just stop it from happening. There we go. And there we go. We've just got a couple of little bits of thread that need to be snipped. And it's fairly even throughout. There's a couple of points where I actually had a little jump, but I turned it through and looked at it, which we'll do now, and it looked absolutely fine. So nobody's going to see it because it is going to be tucked inside. So before you move on to finishing the bottom, I would just check that everything's even, or pretty even throughout, that it's sitting nicely. You can see what happens then is the binding just sits sideways against the gusset. So I'm going to turn that back round. We're going to do the other half. So same as before, pull the lining down. Now you need to be a bit more careful with this than you did at the top, because you've definitely got the ability to really pull it down and make it too tight. So we're going to try and avoid that by using our fingers to keep pushing it flat. So first thing I'm going to do is exactly that. So pull the lining through, but I'm going to use my thumb and fingers to push I'm pushing my fingertips against the seam at the bottom and making sure that that is nice and flat. And you can see, as before, we should have a fairly even lip of fabric here. So I'm going to once again fold it in till it's just about touching the top of the circle, the raw edge. I'm going to go round again and crease that just to make it easier to fold in. Okay, and now we're going to do the same again. So I'm going to clip it in, and this time sort of pulling it against the edge to make sure that I'm not making it too tight. That looks okay. So I'm going to show you how to stitch this one by hand. So here we go. I've got an ordinary sewing thread and sewing needle, no embroidery thread or anything, because it's not going to get seen. So what I'm going to do then, I'm going to start off by burying my knot underneath. And then I'm going to bring it through. So you don't need to do any fancy stitches or anything for this, because it is entirely going to be hidden once everything is pulled up. So I'm literally just going to do a running stitch, or like a running stitch. Oops. Making sure that I am stitching within the seam allowance. And there we go. You may have noticed I broke my thread once because I have a bit of a death grip on all hand sewing or crochet or anything. But you can see that is finished, and all we need to do now is turn it through, turn the top through, spend a little bit of time stretching our fingers, stretching out the circle at the bottom because we want that to be nice and neat. And at the top. There we go. So you've got a nice little pouch which you could have sitting that way up, or you can have it like a little train case, like that. Okay, we'll have a recap and then that's it. So congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. So I am assuming you now have a perfect zippy circle pouch. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Threads. I think that's it. Other than that, happy sewing!